The story of the king and the beggar is a part of Shakespeare's play King Lear. When I told a friend the sermon drew on Shakespeare's play, he raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Will they get it?" My response was, "Of course, our church is used to hearing about Shakespeare." Thank you, Gene Wilcox. He remained skeptical, so I added, "Besides, there will be a test." His eyebrows went further up, so I hastened to add, "It's okay. It's an open book test." As if that would make a difference, huh? Anyway, more on all that later. Let's look at King Lear's story. When we first meet Lear in the play, he's a thoroughly disagreeable fellow. He has decided to retire and has divided his kingdom, he thinks of it as his kingdom, into 3 parts to give to his 3 daughters. But he stipulates that the biggest share will go to the daughter who says she loves him most. He manipulates his children like circus pets to compete in proclaiming their love for him in the most grandiose terms. The 2 eldest daughters eagerly play the game, while his youngest, Cordelia, whose love is greatest and most sincere, resolves to love and be silent. Refusing to be exploited to feed her father's ego, she will not heave her heart into her mouth. When asked by Lear, "What can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters?" Cordelia responds simply, "Nothing." She persists, despite Lear's threat, that nothing will come of nothing. Much more than nothing comes of it, as Lear flies into a rage, takes back her rich dowry from her suitors, disowns her, and banishes her from his presence forever, declaring, "Better thou hadst not been born than not to have pleased me better." The predictable happens. Lear's remaining daughters soon grumble at his visits to their castles with his huge retinue of rowdy knights. So they conspire to end his visits and bar their father from their door. Having divested himself of all his property, Lear has nowhere to go and ends up homeless on a moor in a storm. There, Lear's journey takes an unexpected turn. This self-centered autocrat who abused those closest to him with his power begins to show some feeling for others. And not just any others, but the poor and the homeless, whom Lear has come to understand by sharing the conditions of their life. His own suffering has sparked compassion in Lear, compassion we have not seen or suspected he was capable of. Often our impulse towards compassion for others has its source in our own painful experience. Our suffering can open us to others. But whatever the spark, we all have the capacity for deep empathy. Lear urges us to exercise that capacity when he turns to the audience and says, "Expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, and to act on that feeling." The reading from William Stringfellow illustrates this openness to others. Stringfellow went to live in that rundown Harlem tenement because, as he said, "This is the sort of place in which most people live in most of the world for most of the time. This or something worse." When Stringfellow brought the poor and ill-housed into his mind, he became, in the words of our reading together, divinely dissatisfied, and his dissatisfaction led him to that tenement. But it also gave him a reward. When he brought others into his mind and opened his heart to them, remember what he said? "Then I was home." Lear's advice to open ourselves to the experience of the poor and the powerless is especially telling for us because in our society, the wretched are mostly invisible. Sure, we see a few homeless men and women on the streets, but we don't usually see the hungry families waiting in line at food banks, or the working poor who must choose between rent and a doctor for their sick child, or prisoners, or the mentally ill who are quarantined in distant communities far from our sight and thus out of our minds. The first step is the one Lear urges us to take, to bring them to our minds. In our society, divided as it is by gated communities in landscapes as well as in minds and hearts, that does not happen automatically. We have to make a conscious effort to inform ourselves about the suffering of our neighbors, and then bring them into our hearts, to feel for them and with them. The root of the word compassion means to suffer with. It's worth noting that Lear calls this feeling a physic, that is, medicine to cure the kind of disease we saw in him in the opening scene of the play, and to address the kind of isolation from one another that marks our society. He also confesses that when he was king, he had taken too little care of this, of the most vulnerable, and he addresses those with power to make that compassion a reality in his society. More on that in a moment. As powerful as Lear's call for compassion is, it's still abstract, words not yet embodied in actions. But his advice is immediately tested as he encounters one of his poorest subjects, a bedlam beggar called Tom. These beggars were inmates at the insane asylum we know as Bedlam Hospital, so notorious that the word bedlam now means confused chaos. The inmates had to go out into the community to raise money for their own care, such as it was, by begging. They often wounded themselves to stimulate sympathy from the public. They were on the lowest rung of Shakespeare's rigidly class-conscious society. The beggar Lear confronts is actually the son of one of his counselors, in disguise because he has been falsely accused of seeking his father's death. But Lear never learns his true identity. He encounters him as the beggar he appears to be. At first, Lear only sees Tom as a reflection of himself. He reasons that nothing could have brought the beggar to such a miserable condition but cruel daughters, just like Lear himself. But he soon begins to show interest in Tom, asking him what he was before he was reduced to begging. And after listening to Tom for a while, Lear comes to appreciate the wisdom born of his wretched experience. Calling Tom learned and a philosopher, Lear seeks to benefit from his knowledge. Lear saw beyond Tom's socioeconomic status, his dirty body and ragged clothes. He saw the dignity and worth of the person before him. Lear's relationship with Tom on this stage is remarkable, since kings and beggars were at opposite ends of the social hierarchy. This episode presents an extraordinary and unprecedented glimpse of a different social order, one where the gulf between those with wealth and power and those without either is overcome, where the experience of the poor is affirmed and valued. The most dramatic moment in Lear's relationship with Tom comes when Lear is offered refuge from the storm in a rudimentary shelter. His attendants don't want him to share the meager shelter with Tom, and they try to remove Tom from the scene. But Lear insists that Tom come in with him. As he ushers the beggar into the hovel, he says cheerfully, "Let's in, all." There's no better three-word summary of compassion and justice. Let's in all. Let's all have shelter from life's storms. Let us all have a seat at life's table. We are on this journey together, so let's share our journey together. This moment, when Lear shares his shelter with Tom, emphasizes the connection he felt with this man, despite the vast gulf that separated royalty and beggars. Only a powerful bond could bridge that gulf. This deeply felt bond is at the heart of compassion. We often hear that the work for justice grows out of our affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of all persons. But if we felt no connection with others, if we felt ourselves to be completely separate and apart from them, it's much less likely we would care about their worth and dignity. But we do care, because their dignity is intertwined with ours. We have a stake in their welfare. A story about the Irish playwright Samuel Beckett illustrates what I'm trying to say. When Beckett and a friend were approached by a homeless beggar on a Dublin street one afternoon and asked for money, his friend refused and rebuffed the beggar. Beckett, however, gave the beggar a very generous sum. The beggar, not giving him a chance to change his mind, quickly scurried off. As they walked on, his friend criticized Beckett, saying, "He'll just spend it on drink." "Maybe so," Beckett replied, "but I couldn't afford to take the chance." I couldn't afford to take the chance. What Beckett is pointing us toward in this story is our bond with others, a connection so deep that refusing to meet others' needs injures us ourselves. It erodes our humanity and shrivels our souls. Beckett gives voice to the indelible sense that our moral health is bound to others' welfare, others whose lives look nothing like our own. He acknowledges a bond so deep that others' well-being is crucial to my own. Martin Luther King was speaking of this connection when he declared, "All life is interrelated. The agony of the poor impoverishes the rich. The betterment of the poor enriches the rich. We are inevitably our brother's keeper, because we are our brother's brother." We yearn to embrace that bond so that, as we just sang, we would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community, the beloved community. And when we help free our brothers and sisters from bigotry and poverty, as the band just sang so wonderfully, we shall be free ourselves. Because we are a part of one another, only when others are free can I be fulfilled. Only when we are all in can I realize my full humanity. There's more. Remember that Lear admitted he had neglected the poor when he was in power and called on those who exercise power not to repeat his failure. It's no accident that at the time this play was first presented, in the early 17th century, the English Parliament was deciding what the role of the government should be in promoting the welfare of the least fortunate in society, people like Tom and the other poor. The Protestant Reformation had destroyed the network of Catholic institutions in the countryside that provided a rudimentary safety net for the most vulnerable people in society. The suffering of the countryside was so widespread and deep-seated that it found its way to the halls of power. Lear's story echoed there too. Lear's personal story is one of a journey toward compassion, but because he is a king, at least symbolically, his story relates to the responsibility of society as a whole for people like Tom. One more parable to illustrate this. There was a village by a river where the people were kind and generous. One day, a badly wounded child floated down the river. The villagers rescued her and took her in and cared for her as if she were their own and helped her heal. The next week, another badly wounded child came floating down the river. Again, the villagers rescued him and took him in and cared for him as if he was their own and helped him heal. Every week, another badly wounded child came floating down the river, and every week, the villagers rescued them and took them in and cared for them as if they were their own and helped them heal. Until one day, one of the villagers said, "We need to find out who is wounding these children. We need to go upstream." That is the movement toward justice. The moment when compassion puts on its public face. It's the moment when, as in Mary's chalice reading, caring for the wounded on the Jericho road is no longer enough. When a social structure that produces beggars or wounds children must be changed. Unless we work to change those structures, we have, like Lear, taken too little care of the wounded children. Because we stand on the side of love, we are called to build a world which affirms the dignity of every person and works to bring everyone into the beloved community. Answering that call in the movement toward justice is a joyous and fulfilling moment. It's the moment when we can say with Lear, "Let's in all." The moment when we can say with Samuel Beckett, "Your welfare is crucial to me." The moment when we can say with William Stringfellow, "We are home." Let's answer that call. Let's go upstream. Let's invite all in and work to make a place for everyone at the table. Let's go home. Let's go home together. May it be so.